Hey guys, welcome back to Unorthodox Thoughts. I'm Tiffany Tate, and this is my business partner, Dr. Lilian Rodriguez. And we represent the Unorthodox Group, a lifestyle manifestation and strategic business coaching firm. We are currently going through our 12-month study we're going through it weekly with our growth workbook of our totally unorthodox devotional planner. It is our planner, adult coloring book, and weekly growth workbook with devotions. We're starting this month in January with the story of Esther, and we are reading out of the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 14, and this is out of the NIV version. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. Dr. Lily, what's going on with Esther?
Wow, what's going on with Esther? Tons of things are going on with Esther. So this month we're definitely focusing on Esther, but we are focusing on Esther within the context of God's expectations. And as we were writing this book, which is completely influenced and manifested by God's power and not our own knowledge and understanding, what God brought to my heart is that we can learn a lot about what God is expecting of us through the story of Esther, and that in order for us to really walk into our purpose and understand how we are to live our lives in this world and how we can be successful mothers and entrepreneurs and wives, we really need to understand what God wants from us. And Esther really exemplifies the understanding of what God wanted for her. So in the story of Esther, we know that Esther was an orphan, which means that there was probably a lot of, trauma or loneliness or abandonment issues. Her mother and father had died, and so she was taken in by a cousin, Mordecai. And he took her in and he raised her as his own daughter. And they lived in Persia. And at the time, Persia was it was not Jewish. There was a Jewish community within Persia. So to top it off, she's an orphan. She is a minority in a country, where her people are minorities. And so she's a woman. And so for all accounts, she was in a point of disadvantage. She was disadvantaged, right? As many of us, like women of color, or just being women or being single mothers, or expected to work and be a mom and be a wife, how we feel like we're not in a point of advantage. And so for the standards of the world, in our own limited minds and thinking, she was in a position where she was limited. She was disadvantaged. There was no way that, adding the equation for her, it would finalize or equate to her being a queen and saving her people.
Oh, God.
Exactly. But when God comes in, anything is possible. And so she uses her position, right, as the queen. King Xerxes asked for a queen. He had to get rid of the queen that he had for some reasons and other issues that we can explore later.
A story for another day.
Right. So she was able to use her position of power when the king crowned her queen, to take steps to, limit or stop the persecution of the Jewish people in her community. And so we can see that she took her story, her life, in a way where she understood the expectations, and she was able to move herself from a position of disadvantage, like orphan woman minority, to a position of advantage, a queen, a woman of power, a woman that was admired by others. And so there's some elements about the story of Esther that I kind of want to dig into, and that is that God had given Esther a gift, and God gives us all a gift, right? And sometimes we're like, what the heck is my gift? Like, what, did I crochet? That I'm really good at, like, making sure my kids are, responsible, that I can clean floors really good. Like, we question ourselves because there's a gamma of possibilities as to what our gifts can be. And the scriptures reveal that Esther had the gift of being lovely in form and in features. So we know that she had the gift of beauty. And some of us may have that and some of us may not, but that's not the point here, right? That's what God had given her. And she used her beauty to get to King Xerxes and to get to the kingdom and to move her people from a place of disadvantage, like we mentioned, to a place of advantage. She used that gift that could have been used for a lot of other things. She could have used it for her own vanity. She could have used it to manipulate relationships, but instead she understood that that gift was given to her from God and that God had purpose in that gift. And so another piece that we can see from her, from the story of Esther, is that Esther prepared. So even though she was beautiful, when she went to the king's home or castle, whatever it was, palace, she entered a process of preparation. She lived there with a whole bunch of other women that were also competing with her to become the queen, and they worked on beautification processes and treatments and enhancements, whatever it was at that time that women did to beautify themselves. And so this took time. It's not very clear in the Bible, or is it, that I might have missed?
It's not clear the timing, but we know that during those time frames, these were month-long, sometimes year-long processes of kind of putting on like a pageantry. And so I think it's easy to think about she was chosen, right? The Bible kind of glances over that she was chosen to be the queen, but really you're talking about the hard work and the hustle she had to put in to be chosen to be that queen.
So her gift wasn't enough. Just having this gift was not enough. It was important for her to know that, but she had to work on that. And even though she was lovely in form and she was beautiful, she still had to enter a process of preparation to learn how to use her beauty, to enhance her features, to enhance, her gift, to a position where it could be to the advantage of to the purpose of God's kingdom. And so imagine this: you're in a room or in a group of women that are all competing. I'm sure most of these women were beautiful and had their own, their own gifts. And they're in a process of a competition, living together, sharing time together, sharing quarters together. And so can you imagine how frustrating that must be? Like sometimes Tiffany and I can't get on the same page. So imagine, and we're business partners and we actually like each other. So imagine what it would be like for a lot of women to try to work together. That must have been a time of stress and maybe confusion.
Yeah. A time of confusion, right? Because imagine for her, we're taught to kind of be humble as women, right? And to kind of learn our place. And yet God calls her to go and compete and show off a little bit in front of other women. And we kind of get the sense that she's a humble woman from the story of Esther. She had to feel so uncomfortable, yet she stood in her place, right?
Definitely. And I'm a firm believer that grit that she needed came from her understanding her purpose, and really the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is her obedience. So, when her cousin comes to her and tells her that, the king is looking for a new queen, and that she should go to the palace and apply or solicit for this position, I'm sure that she would have had a lot of questions. First of all, Mordecai wasn't her dad.
Okay.
Mordecai was a man, so he maybe didn't quite relate to her story. She was an orphan. She was probably like, why me? What do I have to contribute to this? And I think that's a position that a lot of us find ourselves in. Like, we might know that we have a gift. We might know that, we're working on something, but we feel unworthy of it. And so I want to take this moment to say that if God chose you, God thinks you're worthy of it. He sees the potential in you. You might not see it. The people in your camp might not see it, but there's definitely something there and something worth exploring and giving into obedience to God for him to manifest that in you. And so we see that, despite the fears that she might have had, despite the feelings of inadequacy that she might have been experiencing because of her position in life, she was obedient. She understood that God was speaking to her. She understood that Mordecai was a man of God and that he was giving her a direction. And she took that and ran with it. As uncomfortable as it might have been, as unknowing as it might have been, as unworthy as she might have felt, she decided to be obedient. And then the
I
last
think
thing
it's important that the Bible never even asks, though, what did you want, right? That doesn't come up in Esther's story. How did she feel? What does she want? We assume she wants to be queen. Who doesn't want to be queen? A lot of people don't want to be queen, right? Who's to say that's what she wanted? And in spite of that, it never comes up what her desires are. It is only what her dedication to her responsibility in God's kingdom is. That's what the obedience looked like for Esther.
definitely, she moved on because God spoke, right?
Period.
And putting her inner desires or her inner wants to the side, which we can definitely talk about, right? Because that's a sacrifice all in its own.
Absolutely.
But we see that she understood her purpose and she persevered. She knew that she was putting herself out there, and that the decision to be obedient to God's purpose, of her coming to a royal position for such a time as this, could possibly put her life at risk. When she went into the palace to meet the king, she had to hide her identity. She had to hide the fact that she was a Jew, that she was a believer, because Mordecai told her she had to, in order for the God's plan to unveil itself. And so imagine sort of the added on stress, besides all the things that we have already talked about, stress of being in a place where those are not your people, and you're really hiding who you are, because God has something greater for you, or God has a bigger purpose. And sometimes it's hard for us to conceptualize that
Yep.
in our heads and in our small ability to think and process. But she really put her life at risk, and she went nonetheless, and she took responsibility, even though the king could have acted against her, and she moved on to her calling, believing what God had promised. So we see four really important features in Esther, and that is that she had a gift, she prepared her gift, she practiced obedience, and she understood her purpose. She moved forward despite all of the logical and reasonable reasons for which she could have stayed home and not even bother with the situation. She put her life at risk. And so, this, I feel like this story is very powerful, that God would take someone who we would think is insignificant, unworthy, not prepared, not credentialed, to take such a position and become such an important part of Christianity, and the foundation and the lineage of God.
I think that she really culminates so many women in the fact that we can be great and we can find success and we can meet God's expectations for ourselves. And it could have absolutely nothing to do what our desired gifts or our desired expectations are for our own life. And success in God's kingdom can be so much greater than we can ever imagine, and still somehow be completely out of line with what we desire, right? And so we really look at the fact that she decided, when wrapping up the month of January and wrapping up Esther, she made a decision to understand her gift and accept that gift for exactly what it was. She didn't try to hustle with God and, negotiate, as I often do, as we often do, which is, God, will you let me please, or will you allow me to be pleased? She simply accepted it at face value. I'm pretty, the king chose me. How do I use this for God's kingdom? And so she took it head on, right? How do we, though, determine if we have a spiritual gift, if we've been blessed in a special way? I mean, I think it's really difficult sometimes for us to understand that sometimes our spiritual gifts are not directly outlined in the fruits of the Spirit, and that sometimes it takes a little savvy to see what our spiritual gifts are. I think that oftentimes we also don't realize that our strengths are our hidden gifts sometimes, and we need to figure out how to use that exact same strength to be a spiritual gift in God's kingdom. Dr. Lily, what do we got on that?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times God's expectations of us are somehow related to our gifts, but understanding that relationship and developing that takes time. I know we read the story of Esther in like 5 minutes, and we kind of processed it in 10, and and we like, okay, this happened, but this took time in the making. This was her life, right? And so sometimes we have these random like areas where we're really good at and we feel confident in doing it, but it's not making us any money, or we can't sustain our families, or it's not feasible at the time. And we think like, okay, I have this, but I can't do anything with it. And what we are here to tell you is that that is something worth looking into, because God has purpose with the things that you think are insignificant. God has purpose with the things that you think are not worthy of anything. And when you have a strength, even though the odds are stacked against you, it's important to look into that, to explore that. What does it mean? How do I grow this? If you like to bake, like, how do I go and get like start baking, and how do I go take a class or a certificate or a license in that, whatever it is. If you like to do makeup, like, God can use anything under the sun to further his purpose and to gain souls for God, and for Christ. So we implore you to really look into that and not just pass it as like, yeah, I have this random gift, or this is not, like, what am I going to do with this?
And explore, right? Because oftentimes people will have trained us our entire lives that exactly what God gave us as a gift is actually a deficit. And that's not the case, right? I look at our dynamic, Dr. Lily, over the years, right? Where the world may not see this now, but you're definitely an introvert, right? And I'm a bad mouth pretending to be extrovert, right? And so if in the wrong situation, and it has over the years gotten us in a lot of trouble, right? In the wrong situations, that could be problematic. But when giving to God, what ended up happening is to these bad mouth introverts and ridiculous extroverts were God took that and made us public speakers and gave us a business in which we became really responsible for a lot of developing other women, right? And it took this mix of your humility and my extravaganza, right? And that balance to kind of create the leadership platform that we created. But at one time in our life, it was a deficit. It was us allowing God to use what he's naturally given us to turn that in, to our benefit and to be able to use it for a gift in his kingdom. Because we've had the potential to not, and we've not when we didn't know what to do.
Not use
exactly, right? And it was about the skill of, like you said, the time and training that it took with God to be able to figure out how to use that gift. Esther could have used that gift for vanity, right? She could have easily, and we know this particular king was really into vanity, and he was really a terrible king. He was a mean man, right? And so she could have thought that using her savvy in that way could have gotten her more gold or more riches. And it was very likely, because he didn't care about anything but vanity, the point that she asked for a favor could have lost her life. Yet and still she chose to stand in the gift that God gave her because she was confident in that gift.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Tiffany. One, like, about that our gift might look like something that other people have told us is not a gift, or that other people have attributed as a deficit or a limit for us. It's about exploring that, because what other people think is a limit is a fountain of possibilities for God. And when we speak about sort of these verses and these stories, these are things that definitely were influenced by the Lord and sort of his guiding, because my abilities are not that great at writing. So they're definitely influenced, but the one thing that we can say is that we've definitely lived this. We've lived it where where I had a PhD and I was a psychologist, but I didn't speak up anywhere. So no one, like, I was introverted. It didn't serve me. So I had this quality about me that was to my detriment. And so God has taken that and completely transformed it. And so, I mean, we have countless stories of things that were meant for our evil, meant for our bad, were limitations. Brown, Black, females, first generation, college educated, immigrant families, no generational wealth. All of these things were tabs against us. And yet God, right? And yet God. And so when we're talking about these things, there are things that we really have lived and experienced with the Lord. And so we impart this knowledge with the understanding that it was, imparted to us from God, but definitely experiences that we've had ourselves as women, as entrepreneurs, as mothers, as wives, real life.
Real life. It's just that simple, right? So we leave you guys with the same explanation that we've had with God for years, which is, what is our gift and what purpose is at serving your kingdom. And so this week we implore you guys to really go to God in prayer and to allow him to show you your gifts and be open and flexible to what he shows you, because oftentimes what our gifts are or what he wants out of our gifts may be different than what we want to see out of our lives. We ask you to go to God with an open and honest heart and allow him to kind of guide you in that way as we journey through finding purpose and stepping up as women leaders in our own lives this year. Again, we are going through our weekly devotions from our totally unorthodox devotional planner. It is our adult coloring book, devotional planner, and growth workbook. Please check it out. The link will be in the comment section, and we'll be going week by week, going through the boss women leaders that we see in the Bible, as well as the devotions that help us to grow and to focus on God's will for our lives this year. We thank you guys for tuning in again. We'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.